A while back, I made a video exploring a potential lore connection between Arc Raiders and the finals. My conclusion was that a direct narrative link wasn't possible because the games are set decades apart, but they might still share the same universe. Back then, we needed more evidence to know for sure. Of course, things we might consider as evidence of a link could also just be some Easter egg nods or references appearing between the two games that the devs have thrown in for fun. But the bottom line at the time of making that video was that we needed more evidence to be able to make a conclusion. And I kind of thought that was, and still is, a pretty good summary of how these two games might or might not connect. However, recently, content creator Inkslasher, who has well over 1 million subs, made this video titled Arc Raiders and the Final Stories Are Connected. And I've since seen a lot more chatter about how this is somehow now confirmed. So I felt compelled to look at the facts, old and new, give my opinion on what was presented, and in my view, set a few things straight. I reached out to Inkslasher to do a full reaction video, but since I haven't heard back, I'm going to quote his points directly instead. And I've provided a link to his video in the description so you can watch it for yourself. And to be very clear, this video is in no way an opinion on Inkslasher as a content creator or any of his other videos. While I might critique some of the info he presents in that video, that's all it is, a critique of info. So let's take a look at what he said, and I'll give you my thoughts on his info and then my own info and some conclusions at the end. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, just know that I'm a member of Embark Studios creator program, so I've tagged this video as a promotion to keep that relationship nice and transparent. Before we dive into Inkslasher's lore theory, a couple of quick Arc Raiders updates that you might not have caught. Arc Raiders has a new community lead who goes by the name of Ossen. She joins a growing list of Embarkers who have come from DICE, makers of the Battlefield franchise. Continuing the pretty much now weekly posts in the Arc Raiders Discord, Embark gave us 4 new early concept art images of the spaceport map, which were posted in the official art channel and are described by Ossen as having been created to help define their prop designs and decay or wear level that they were aiming for in building interiors. I don't know about you, but as much as I like seeing all this concept art, I'm definitely getting pretty hungry for Embark to provide us with some more substantial marketing for the game. It's now the first thing I look for on my phone when I wake up each morning. Anyhow, let's take a look at what Inkslasher's video was about. After a brief introduction, he said, "However, these two games by the same studio are hiding something, and that is what I wanted to dive into today. Because believe it or not, the two games that you just saw, I truly believe are in the same universe and are actually a part of the exact same story." The important thing to note here is that he said he believes they're in the same universe rather than they must be in the same universe. He continued, "So the finals takes place about 75 years in the future around the year 2100. Now the finals isn't real. Well, it is real, but it's not real. You see, it's the largest virtual reality game show. So basically, everyone who you're seeing within the finals is not real. They are avatars for people who are sitting in a headset outside of this actual world. Now, this is a small portion of what they call the metascape. Most of this info is correct, except that the real world for the people competing in the finals is actually called the meat space, not the metascape. We know that from the finals brand guide, which was published by Embark Studios back in late October 2023, just over a month before the finals launched. That brand guide also names the space the finals takes place in as the virtual world. Inkslasher goes on to explain how the finals is owned by a company called Multico, how it has seasonal sponsors, and also how it's been disrupted on occasion by a rogue hacker collective known by the acronym CNS. Now, CNS specifically states to seek the truth, you must look beyond the walls. Now, we will come back to that one in a minute, but this kind of sets up what the finals actually is, this virtual reality world. So aside from the metaspace, meat space thing, this is a solid introduction to the finals lore. He continued, "Now let's move over to Arc Raiders. The story of Arc Raiders takes place in the year 2180, so 80 years after the events of the finals. This is correct chronologically, but remember, we don't yet know if they're in the same universe. He then explains that the game starts in an underground community called Speranza, located in Toledo, which is what used to be Italy. This is a bit confusing, so let's clarify. Speranza is actually a small underground part of an in-game region called Toledo, which takes its name from a real street and metro station in Naples. The game's main area, the Rust Belt, is geographically inspired by the Canary Islands, even though it's set near Mount Vesuvius in Italy. The two areas share a somewhat similar landscape. The developers have taken some artistic license, and the mixed locations might be a result of them repurposing maps when the game changed genres. So we can't really use these locations to make strong lore conclusions. Let's continue with Inkslasher. Now, the reason why I say what used to be Italy is because what happened years before was a total global environmental collapse. Now the surface of the Earth is patrolled by a group of basically robots known as the Ark. Now, where they came from is a little bit of a mystery, but we have an answer to that, and it actually ties directly into the finals. Because you see, in Tech Test Weekend 2 of Ark Raiders, there was a helmet found on the ground, and on the back of it, it said Alpha Actor and showed the logo that you are seeing here. Okay, this is where Inkslasher's info starts to get a little inaccurate, and I think lacking a little evidence, because the details are important here. As you can see, there's no helmet on the ground shown here, and if you search for any mention of this on Reddit or other Ark Raiders community places that you'd expect it to show up, there isn't an image. I think if there is one, he definitely should have shown it here. What we do see is the backsides of helmets seen in the out-of-round UI, or we could have viewed your own character or a teammate wearing them in-game. And while the logos on the helmets superficially look like the sponsor Alpha Actor from the finals, they do actually differ, with the lower part extending here when it doesn't on the Alpha Actor logo. He claims the supposed helmet on the ground showed the Alpha Actor logo, but the ones he shows clearly don't. In fact, this logo actually previously appeared as a portion of the X7/AV logo, which first appears in the Spotlight Stealer cosmetic bundle, which was available by completing contracts in the Steal the Spotlight limited time mode that the finals saw in Season 1. Inkslasher sort of acknowledged this difference from the Alpha Actor logo, saying, "You see, looking at this one, you may be looking at it and be like, hey, those logos are not exactly the same, I can't quite make that out. Well, it's a good thing we got more of them then." But by saying we got more of them, he seems to have assumed we can count these as an Alpha Actor logo when they're not. We haven't seen the X7/AV branding since Steal the Spotlight limited time mode, so I don't think these stand up as evidence related to a specific sponsor from the finals. Let's see the other logos he presents though. You see, in a recent trailer for Ark Raiders, we see this billboard put up and it says Jiangsu Romagna. However, this is once again another sponsor from within the finals. But this isn't again. I think we never actually had Alpha Actor in the first place. Nonetheless, Jiangsu Romagna's name and logo do appear in the finals. The logo first appears in the finals closed alpha trailer, and the logo and name appear together on the Jumpstart jacket, which is part of the Holto Insured Driver Set bundle. So let's see how Inkslasher interpreted that. But here's the interesting part. If you look at what is written over top, it says Bugatti, which is Italian for liars. Now, all of these so far you could look at and be like, well, maybe these are Easter eggs that Embark just put into the game. But these are all on purpose, because this is promotional material for the Rollerbot, one of the robots or Ark robots that are in the game. Well, that logo behind it is, well, this. This is another sponsor from the finals by the name of Dyson, which clearly is now the company we know that made a Rollerbot, which is one of the Ark robots cleansing the surface in Ark Raiders. This part of his video really doesn't make sense to me. He said, now, all of these so far you could look at and be like, well, maybe these are Easter eggs that Embark just put into the game, but these are all on purpose. This is where we need to differentiate between lore and Easter eggs. Lore is a deliberate piece of a game's narrative or world building. Easter eggs, on the other hand, are often just a fun nod or a reference to another game, but they're definitely put into the game or trailers and artwork on purpose. But that purpose isn't to build a narrative. The devs often just place these references for a laugh, not to create a canonical connection. We have to keep in mind that Jiangsu Romanya hasn't been used in the finals from a lore perspective yet, so for all we know, this is simply an Arc Raiders Easter egg that's been teased to us in the finals, and that's all. Or potentially the other way around, with the name appearing in the Arc Raiders trailer, but there's no certainty with any lore aspect to the name at this stage. Also, the Dyson logo, which appeared upside down and behind the Rollbot image, was shown on the Arc Raiders website before the game switched genres in 2022, and that image was subsequently removed. So for all we know, the Embark team had that logo available to use and simply decided to move it from Arc Raiders to the finals when the finals was brought forward as Embark's first release. Any relationship between the Rollbot and that logo no longer exists and hasn't for some time. The remainder of Inkslasher's video is then a theory he presents on how lore from both games connects, based on the assumptions that these previous observations are proof of a connection. That theory revolves around a commonality of the owners of the finals being wealthy corporations and the history of Arc Raiders through this piece of graffiti pointing to the wealthy being the only ones that could escape Earth during the Exodus period following an environmental collapse. And to be fair, I don't think there's anything wrong with this theory. I just think there's no in-game evidence to confirm a lore connection in the first place. Just because a lore theory is possible is meaningless without evidence that confirms the games have a lore connection in the first place. It would be the same for me if I said that part of the X7/AV logo or the Jiangsu Romanya name and logo that appear between the games are all Easter eggs that the devs have put into one game to tease the other. But there's no way for me to prove that either. There are actually other logos that appear across both games, like the Ranzio logo. Again, there's no way to differentiate a lore link from an Easter egg here. Any conclusion anyone currently makes requires a leap of faith. Just because people might want there to be a lore connection doesn't mean there is one. I could also argue that because everything we've seen in Arc Raiders is from pre-release builds of the game, any of these logos and names and so on could actually just be placeholder assets the developers used for the sake of time, and they'll actually change those before the launch. For instance, the characters we see on shipping containers in the finals have been repurposed for a similar use in Arc Raiders. But how would we tell if this is lore, an Easter egg, or simply reused assets to save time for the developers? There's no certainty in any of those. And that leads me to another piece of supposed evidence, which wasn't mentioned by Inkslasher, but I want to address it as I've seen it cited in the community as somehow being irrefutable proof from Embark Studios that a lore connection exists between the games. However, I think it actually doesn't support that at all. This happened in the finals Discord back in early May, towards the end of Tech Test 2 for Arc Raiders. Discord member Physics asked Embark developer Relrun, who note is a software engineer not part of Embark's narrative team, has Rob, so that's Embark's chief content officer and main Easter egg guy, Rob Runison, has Rob given any confirmation as to whether anything in Arc Raiders will affect Easter eggs in the finals, outside of broad lore connections? So note two things here. Firstly, that Physics asked about Arc Raiders affecting Easter eggs in the finals, and as part of the question, they've made an assumption that there are already broad lore connections between the two games, but also that they want to know about how the two games relate to Easter eggs between them outside of these supposed lore connections. Relrun then responded writing, it relatively known fact that Arc Raiders and the finals have a relation in some degree. I guess we're turning into Embarkverse. Physics then writes, the Embarkverse, got to make it official. And Relrun responds, but wouldn't it be better to let people to figure this out? So, this has somehow been interpreted by some as some sort of confirmation that Arc Raiders and the finals share the same universe. However, what I think Relrun, again, who is a software engineer, not part of the narrative team or anyone necessarily involved with either Easter eggs or lore in either game, is actually saying is that because the games are both made by Embark and therefore part of the Embarkverse of games, there might be Easter eggs that relate between the games. The question was about Easter eggs. The answer was therefore about Easter eggs, not lore. And it was more unlikely to be about lore because as a software engineer, Railrun isn't going to be involved in creating game lore or narrative. I think this is a classic case of people wanting to read something they have in mind, but not actually understanding, firstly, what was being asked, and secondly, that the reply related specifically to what was being asked. I think, if anything, Railrun's answer supports us in interpreting all of these things as Easter eggs and not lore. So, what's the takeaway here? Some people want the lore of these two games to be connected. I can see it's an exciting idea. Personally, I'd prefer them not to be. I'd rather see their stories stand on their own feet and not fall back on some Matrix-like trope that's been used before. But right now, the evidence is simply not there either way. We need to be patient and wait for something irrefutable, not a reused logo, not a half-joking Discord comment. It's better to focus on the game and its lore as it's presented than to get caught up in a theory that might not exist. And here lies a point I've made with my cheeky title for this video. I actually try hard to avoid giving my videos misleading titles, but today I decided to take a little artistic license with that to make a point. I could make a video with this title right now and conclude in it that all of the commonalities between the two games we've observed are solely Easter eggs, and also argue why the finals and arc raiders are not connected from a lore point of view. But I can't prove it. And the same applies for the likes of Inkslasher or anyone else that thinks there might be a lore connection. They currently can't prove it. We need something that irrefutably proves how all these things relate, and that something doesn't yet exist. The moment it does exist, I'll be amongst the first to make a video about it, no matter what the outcome. Thanks for watching this video to the end. A big thank you to the members of my channel for their ongoing support, especially my Black Tier members TJ and Thoronike17. And of course to Embark Studios for having me as a member of their content creator program. Both are greatly appreciated. Do the usual YouTube business if you want to see more videos from me from now on. Give a like or comment as you see fit, and enjoy the rest of your day. Kia kaha. Stay strong.
Everybody knows the world ain't right. Down on your knees, get up and fight.